It started like any other day in Stanton. Cargo manifests filed, jump points plotted. Haulers running the same routes they had run 100 times before. Nobody was watching the skies any closer than usual. Nobody had any reason to. Then the first convoy stopped responding. Then another. Then the emergency channels started filling up. Not with one incident, not with two, but with reports coming in from every corner of the system at once. And before anyone could make sense of it, a voice cut through every comm channel, every screen, every terminal in Stanton. Calm, certain, unhurried. We are the ones in charge. You will be witnesses. We are XenoThreat. In the hours that followed, Stanton would learn exactly what that meant. But almost nobody that day understood how long that moment had been in the making. Welcome to Citizen Lore, where we dive into the history of the verse. Today we take a look at XenoThreat, their origins, their history, and how they became one of the most dangerous forces in the verse. Picture this, a UEE Navy pilot. They have spent years on the frontier. They have flown against Vandal raiders, watched squadrons get wiped out, and lost many of their friends along the way. They have done everything the Empire asked of them, and then they come home, and their government is signing trade deals, opening borders, and inviting alien species they were trained to fear and fight into the heart of human commerce. MISC is building Xi'an engines into its ships, and alien manufacturers are being welcomed at expos across the Empire. For those Navy pilots, this is not progress or a new beginning, it is betrayal. Now multiply that feeling across hundreds of veterans, across decades of wars, Cold Wars, and uneasy peace treaties that feel, to those who fought in them, less like resolution and more like surrender. The United Empire of Earth was itself forged in the fires of conflict with alien civilizations. The First Tevarin War, emphasis on first, because a second conflict would erupt not long after, costing thousands of lives and being fought across the verse. Both these wars left deep scars on humanity's collective memory. Then came the Vandal, who to this day continue to raid and devastate human systems. Even the Xi'an, now celebrated trade partners, had been Cold War adversaries for centuries. For those who lived through all of that, who gave years of their lives to it, the slow corporate and political embrace of alien cultures was not something they could simply accept. And in the shadows, among the disillusioned and the grieving, something began to form. Protests at first, perhaps, political action, quiet conversations between people who felt the same way. But at some point the conversations stopped being quiet. What we know, and this is significant, is that the first members of XenoThreat, and quite possibly its very founders, were disenchanted veterans of the UEE Navy. Not fringe radicals or desperate criminals. Trained soldiers, officers who understood military strategy, ship-to-ship combat, logistics, and force projection. Men and women who had given everything to the Empire, and felt like the Empire had simply abandoned them. Whatever ideological movement had been building in the shadows for years, it was these people who gave it discipline, gave it structure, and gave it teeth. That military foundation would go on to define everything about how XenoThreat thinks, fights, and survives. Understanding what makes XenoThreat dangerous requires understanding what they are not. They are not pirates. Pirates want your cargo. XenoThreat wants to make a point, and they will burn your cargo and execute your crew to make it, and then broadcast the whole thing across the system. They are not mercenaries. Mercenaries go where the credits take them. XenoThreat answers only to its ideology, and they are not a gang. Gangs are held together by profit and fear. XenoThreat is held together by belief, which makes it something far more difficult to destroy. At their core, XenoThreat is a revolutionary movement with a paramilitary structure. Anti-alien, anti-corporate, anti-UEE. They see the Empire's embrace of alien trade and technology not as diplomacy, but as a slow extinction of humanity, selling off its identity piece by piece to species that not long ago were enemies. In their eyes, the corporations are not just greedy, they are collaborators. And collaborators in XenoThreat's world are dealt with accordingly. Their military background shapes everything about how they operate. These are not improvised fighters making it up as they go. Their raids are coordinated. Their timing is disciplined, and their fleet capital ships and fighters operating in concert did not materialize from nowhere. Former Navy personnel do not just bring their experience when they leave the service, they bring their contacts, Their knowledge of surplus vessels, of supply chains, of where equipment moves, and where it can be intercepted or quietly acquired. The fact that XenoThreat can field capital-class warships is not a mystery if you consider who likely built the organization from the ground up. This also explains something that confuses people who try to compare XenoThreat to other outlaw groups in Pyro. Most criminal organizations operating out of that system are economically motivated, small operations, calculated risks, and minimal exposure. They do not want attention. XenoThreat, though, wants exactly the opposite. The bigger the action, the more public, the more people who hear the message, the better. That recklessness is not a flaw in their strategy, it is their strategy. Every burning convoy is a recruitment poster. Every executed crew member is a statement. This drove the other gangs of Pyro, most notably the Headhunters, absolutely mad. They had spent years keeping Pyro off the UEE's radar, operating quietly in a system nobody cared about. XenoThreat's theatrics threatened all of that, but there was little they could do. By 2947, XenoThreat had seized control of Ruin Station and made itself the de facto owner of the station in Pyro. While Headhunters had been the de facto rulers of Pyro, they posed no significant threat or opposition to XenoThreat, who, with their large fleets and discipline, overran all of the Headhunters' defenses easily, bringing the delicate power balance in Pyro out of whack. As the locals say, whoever has the most guns wins, and XenoThreat had the most guns. For years, XenoThreat's operations remained a persistent but manageable problem for Stanton. Ambushes, raids, and the occasional propaganda broadcast. Like in 2950, when they hacked the ASOP terminals at Port Olisar, above Crusader, hijacking screens across the station to broadcast their message. Annoying, embarrassing for station security, but containable. Then in early 2951, they attacked a corporate convoy bound for Terra. Every ship destroyed, all cargo obliterated, the entire crew executed publicly, branded as collaborators of corporate greed. This was not a raid. This was a statement, and it was directed at everyone watching. Even alien governments took notice. Both the Xeon and the Banu formally wrote to humanity expressing their concern about XenoThreat's growing threat. The irony was not lost on anyone. The very species XenoThreat despised were now sending letters on humanity's behalf. But the UEE's response remained limited. Its attention stretched thin across an empire with no shortage of problems. XenoThreat read that silence as permission. On the 4th of February, 2951, the same day as that opening transmission from earlier, XenoThreat did not launch a raid. They launched an invasion. The scale of it was unlike anything Stanton had ever seen before. Simultaneous attacks on convoys across the entire system. Multiple capital-class vessels are deployed at strategic points, destabilizing shipping lanes and communications. The whole thing bore the unmistakable hallmark of military planning, because that is exactly what it was. How XenoThreat financed and assembled a force of this size remains one of the great unanswered questions of the operation. Significant outside backing must have been involved. But whoever was behind it, the result was devastating. The UEE Navy's immediate response was limited to what they could scramble in time: the Javelin-class destroyer UEES Warhammer and its support group. A single capital ship against an invasion force. It was not enough on its own. So the advocacy activated the Civilian Defense Force, ordinary citizens of Stanton, flying their own ships, answering the call to defend their homes. For 11 days, the CDF fought across the entire system, rescuing ambushed hauliers, dismantling XenoThreat positions, holding the line while the Warhammer worked to coordinate a response. The decisive moment came near INS Jericho Station, near Microtech, where the Warhammer had docked for critical resupply. XenoThreat had ambushed the supply convoys, leaving the destroyer dangerously low on what it needed to stay in the fight. CDF pilots threw themselves into a desperate salvage operation, recovering volatile and vital supplies from the wreckage of ambushed ships and ferrying them back under fire. Then, XenoThreat made their final play, a direct assault on the CDF with an Idris-class frigate bearing down on the docked Warhammer. If the Warhammer fell there, the battle was over. But the CDF held the ground. The Idris was driven back. The Warhammer was resupplied, cleared the dock, and brought its full weight to bear. On the 14th of February, 2951, 11 days after the invasion began, XenoThreat withdrew. The UEE Navy and the Civilian Defense Force had held Stanton. The terrorist group retreated back into Pyro, bloodied and beaten. What happened after the assault on Stanton is a story that does not get told enough, because in many ways it is darker than the invasion itself. Stanton was traumatized. Citizens had lost friends, family, and livelihoods, and in the anger that followed, many of them crossed into Pyro looking for someone to make pay for it. Unofficial raiding parties, vigilante groups, people who had every reason to be furious and no institutional outlet for it. Pyro, a system that had spent decades cultivating its invisibility, suddenly found itself under a spotlight it had never wanted. What followed is what many describe today as an undeclared war between Stanton and Pyro. The Citizens for Prosperity, the Frontier Fighters, the Headhunters. Organizations on all sides were pulled into a spiral of escalating violence that nobody had planned and nobody could easily stop. The Frontier Fighters, who began as a group dedicated to fighting criminals like XenoThreat, descended into increasingly brutal methods, were branded outlaws themselves, and were eventually destroyed in a concerted effort by the very citizens they had set out to protect. Organization after organization that rose to confront the chaos was consumed by it. And XenoThreat? They sat at Ruin Station and watched. Occasionally they were caught in the crossfire, but the brunt of the war fell on everyone else. While Stanton and Pyro tore at each other, XenoThreat rebuilt. Quietly, patiently, with the discipline of people who had been soldiers and knew that wars are won by those who survive long enough to fight the next battle. Now, in 2956, the intelligence reports are coming in again. Intercepted transmissions, unusual fleet movements out of Pyro. And this time, the picture they paint is different from 2951. XenoThreat is not mobilizing against convoys or corporate infrastructure. Their sights are set on the aliens living within Stanton itself, Wikalo, the Banu traders, every non-human presence in the system. The ideology is no longer abstract. It has a target. And that is what makes XenoThreat so dangerous. They were not created out of nowhere. They were born from old wounds, veterans who fought alien wars, frontier citizens who felt abandoned, and people who believed the UEE had traded humanity's security for corporate profit and alien diplomacy. XenoThreat took that anger and turned it into ideology. That is why they are not just pirates or another Pyro gang. Pirates want cargo. Gangs want territory. XenoThreat wants a war. They are organized, disciplined, and led by people who understand military strategy. Every attack is propaganda. Every defeat becomes proof, in their eyes, that the fight must continue. So beating XenoThreat long-term cannot only mean destroying their ships in the next battle. Their supply lines have to be cut. Their leadership has to be hunted down. Ruin Station and Pyro can no longer remain safe places for them to rebuild. But the deeper problem also has to be faced. The UEE cannot keep ignoring veterans, frontier systems, and the resentment that groups like XenoThreat feed on. Because as long as those wounds remain open, XenoThreat will always find new recruits. Stanton has beaten them before, but every time the system celebrates and turns its attention elsewhere, XenoThreat retreats to Ruin Station and starts counting what it has left. They do not need to win, they just need to survive long enough to try again, and so far, that is exactly what they have done. The storm is coming again. Will this finally be the campaign that ends XenoThreat for good? Or will they once more slip away into Pyro, ready to rebuild, ready to return? And that's it for today's deep dive here on Citizen Lore. If this gave you a clearer look at the darker corners of the verse, then the job is done. If you enjoyed the video, a like and subscription go a long way. Until next time, fly safe.